20, with a bachelor's degree in political science. I have a minor in journalism and the public interest. And then I took a couple years off to to do some work at an immigration law firm. And I'm currently in my second year with the transatlantic master's program at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, focusing on European governance. This is actually dual degree program in partnership with UNC Chapel Hill and Gothenburg University in Sweden. So I'm actually talking to you from Sweden at the moment. And over the course of this presentation, I'll be sharing my experiences of getting into and finding funding for US institutions at both bachelor's and master's levels, and then provide you a few important tips for how you can build your own successful applications. So just as a technical note, Education USA system has 5 steps to US study, and this presentation is mostly focusing on these first 3 components. There's other stuff they do with the other 2, but today it's just those first 3. So why international education? Why is it such a big deal? Well, according to the US government, international education is supposed to be a $7 trillion industry by 2025. And a lot of that money comes from the travel involved, the students just spending on the life and daily affairs and all these other things that kind of come with studying internationally. So there's a lot of money in international education, so we think it's very important. Also, there's other aspects such as the workforce development, whether you go back to your home country or whether you stay in the US afterwards. There's ways that you can contribute to the workforce in whichever place you choose, whether that's bringing skills and knowledge and experience that you learned in the US back home, or whether that's bringing your international perspective into the US. There's also the cultural exchange and citizen diplomacy aspect, or also referred to as low politics sometimes, where the focusing on individuals and making connections with each other instead of just trying to have international relations focused on high-level diplomatic contacts. If you can bring populations and actual just regular people together, whether that's because they're going overseas to a new country and meeting with people in that town, or whether it's just people you live in that town and you're having international students come into the town to learn and get an education, and then your interactions with them, both levels, you get this very strong cultural exchange, which then helps both countries get closer together when the citizens are on better terms. And so for all of these reasons, we in the US are ready for you, and we are ready for international students to come to our universities. Now, as a student, why is the US in particular the best place to go for higher education? Well, from a practical perspective, we have some of the strongest universities in practically every field of study that you can think of. So you're going to find a very high level of education at US universities. And you can find universities practically everywhere. All 50 states have some sort of strong high university. Even Wyoming has a university. So if you want to go there, that's obvious. You actually can. And these schools are all over the place, whether that's different environments, different climates, different sort of towns and cities, whether it's in a very small agricultural town or in a big city, there's going to be a different environment, different experience. Also, if you're going to a school in the North versus the Midwest versus the South, you're going to have different experiences there. For example, my bachelor's degree at Allegheny College, that's a small working class town in Northwest Pennsylvania, which is a different environment from the small college town in North Carolina that I'm doing my master's at. And then if you want to go to something like DC or New York City, you're going to have a completely different environment there. So there's so many different options for and different environments for you to choose from. And activities is another big important component. I've now spent at least a semester studying in 3 different countries, and of all 3 of them, the US is by far the one where you have the widest, most accessible range of activities that you can be part of just as a student. There's a club that can do practically anything. This picture is from my ultimate frisbee team, and when I was in undergraduate, and you can just, and if there's something that you can't find, it's probably pretty easy to start. A lot of US universities pride themselves on all the different sorts of extracurricular activities that are available for students to do in their time away from classes. And some of these clubs actually have positions where they may seek graduate student involvement. Like even in the transatlantic master's program I'm in now, some of the students who came in from other countries were really interested in climate change and climate policy, and so they worked with the student government on climate related initiatives, and there was a place for them there, and they were accepted and able to participate in that. And then, of course, a US degree can give you access to US employers and can make it a little easier to go through the immigration process and the process of keeping your status in the US. And so, but how do you get there? That's another big question. Broken it down to a couple steps. First of all, you want to research your options and see what's out there. As I said, there's a whole lot of different variety, whole lot of different options, but that also means that it can be a lot to try to narrow down. The general sentiment is that you should start researching at least 12 to 18 months before the program begins. I definitely say start as early as you can because there's so many different components that you're going to want to focus on. And so definitely make sure you're spreading your net wide and giving yourself the time to do that. And but then once you have found stuff and are trying to figure out how explicitly you want to move from that, focus on what are the programs of interest. What are you particularly trying to find? What are you particularly trying to get out of your education? And focus on programs that specifically have a lot of those components, and maybe look beyond some of the first or second schools that people will mention or think of. Aid can often be easier. You can often get better financing if you go beyond like the first most obvious choice that someone would suggest. And maybe if you're really interested in a particular university, you can look at some people have looked at whether they offer some sort of summer short course where you can kind of get experience with life at that school and kind of live in that context for a little bit before actually having to take the big step and commit to it. And this can also be a great way to get contacts in the program before you apply, which can also be another good thing if you can identify someone who's doing something at that university that you would want to be a part of or you want to be doing. One thing I would say, though, is beware of just going based off of rankings. Sometimes it can be hard to tell exactly what those rankings are based on, but for instance, are they based on funding or something where, because the university just opened a new multi-million-dollar building for their upper-level computer science classes. But if you're not an upper-level computer science student, maybe that's not something relevant and you may never enter that building. And so what is that necessarily doing for your education, just the fact that they have this? Or maybe they built a new athletics stadium and you're not going in there for athletics, then it doesn't necessarily mean that just because they're highly ranked, they're going to give a good as quality of an education as what you're really looking for. And I guess the last thing I'd say is just as I call it, find your why. Why are you interested in studying in the US? What are you trying to get out of these opportunities? What are you going to the US for? And then find programs that most directly help contribute to and adhere to the ability for you to get that. And then the second step, of course, financing is going to be a very big component of US study. So, first thing I want to say on financing is there's a ton of options out there. There's a lot of different sources of financing. The problem is it can be really hard to find them. There's three main sort of ways in which people can try to find financing that's not just based on money they happen to have at the moment. The first big one would be institutional support. You mostly tend to see this with undergraduate programs or doctoral programs. For instance, when I was accepted into Allegheny College, one of the reasons why I ended up going there was because they gave me this funding package where they said, we're going to basically just take off X amount of money from the sticker price, from the price that we list on our website, and require you to only pay a certain amount, which then ended up being a lot less and made it a lot more financially reasonable for me to go there. So if you're doing well in school and if you have a candidacy that these universities want to see, then that can really help you get some financing from the universities. Also, if you're going for a PhD or like a doctoral program, my brother is actually studying a PhD right now over at the University of Michigan. He's been able to take advantage of basically having it practically off, not only funded by the university, but the university giving him a small stipend, a small little bit of spending money for along with the program. So that's really helping him. Oftentimes with these PhD programs, what that comes with is assistantships. So that means that maybe you have to teach introductory classes or spend a certain amount of time helping with lab work, and it's sort of almost as a job part of the university, you could say. But then that's another way to get the program partially or almost fully financed, depending on the requirements of the particular program. Then, of course, the second big source is nonprofit or government. There's just a bunch of these out there. Different types often include scholarships or fellowships or something like that. We at Education USA have built a website that can has a link to a lot of different sources. I'm not necessarily going to say this is exhaustive because I don't think that's possible to get an exhaustive list of everything, but that's a very good way to start to find programs that you may be eligible for. Obviously, the eligibility criteria is going to vary, but starting there might give you some ideas for things that you can start looking at to help pay for your studies. And then employment is also an option. That it really depends on your visa status and what the requirements are and what you can and can't do with that. So that may kind of be dependent. I'm not going to get into that here, but the US government does have a very good website at the State Department for information about this that you might want to put in, and I can drop these links in the chat after this presentation just so that we can have them. And then the last thing I'd say about financing is beware that, especially external financing, deadlines are going to be different from the application deadline. So you're going to want to know how to know these other deadlines and keep to those deadlines, even if maybe the funding may have to get all the stuff for the funding in earlier. And so you want to make sure that you do that and you don't just really keep on track of that. Next thing is just completing your application. These are big pieces of work. There's lots of the questions, whether multiple choice, short answer. You may have an essay or multiple essays you have to write. There's going to be supporting documents such as maybe transcripts. Some colleges will ask for test scores like subject test scores, or language tests, or in some programs, like if you're going to an art program, there's probably going to be a portfolio of prior work that they want to see. Make sure you know what these components are and make sure that you have all of them in the application so you submit the complete application in time. Deadlines are often in fall and winter, but some programs do have deadlines outside these times. Tests are going to have their own deadlines. AIDA are going to have their own deadlines. At some schools, you can apply it a little earlier and maybe get some better aid options. If you apply toward the later end, maybe it might be harder because they've already sort of started figuring out who they're going to give aid to. And then the last thing is just make sure you start early and keep working. Like any big, large project, as you probably had from your own education, just try to make sure you're not doing everything last minute, because then it's not going to be your best effort. Just start early and do a little bit at a time, and it's going to be a lot better of an application. And then just some general advice to think about when looking at studying in the US. Housing and food is, of course, a very big component to wherever you study. And these can depend on what the institutions offer. Some places may offer some sort of housing opportunities that you can get on campus if you're a graduate or an international student. Some places don't, depends on the program. Generally, there's going to be a difference between either on-campus or off-campus housing. On-campus tends to be a little more consistent. Off-campus, sometimes you can find something that's a little cheaper, but it can also be a lot more expensive. Location can vary more. Off-campus, does that mean right next to the campus, or does that mean other side of town? Does that mean town next door where it could be really hard to get to class? Also, on-campus housing, there's probably going to be a portal through the university, like whether that's a page or something where you can go in and see all the different housing options. Off-campus, you're going to have to do your own research. There's not going to be one place where you can find that. And then for meals, what you may want to consider is if the university offers a meal plan so that you can have some meals in their dining hall, especially for undergraduate. Lots of times, if you're going to be at a place where then there's a lot of US undergraduates as well, they're going to often be, every so often, they're going to want to go have dinner together in the dining hall or something. And it's going to be a lot easier to do that if you have at least a certain amount of ability to have some meals in the dining hall. So for applications, there again, make sure you start and finish early. I do some stuff where both with studying political science. I don't know how many of you are sort of in political science politics, but there's a lot of essays, a lot of writing involved with that. And just general rule there is you want to make sure that you get feedback and that you're able to give yourself time to finish the essay, put it aside for like a day, and then go back to it and read it over again before it's finally submitted. Because oftentimes I find this in my writing where sometimes you put something out there and then when you go back to it, it doesn't sound nearly as good as it did at first, or it's not as clear to other people what you meant to say. So it's very important to get that feedback and get people understand, get other people's impressions of your writing. And so, like if there's some counselor or a parent or someone or guardian who you can talk to and a friend who can just read it over and say what they think. Another thing is try to see if the admissions offices of the universities you're looking at have some sort of email list that you can get on. Help you get contacts, also help you keep up touch with what the next step is and then in the application. And another very big one that I've noticed, especially through some work in my Education USA program here, is that if you can find any sort of contact at a school of interest or program of interest, like is their professor doing really interesting work? Is there some club or entity where you can get already talking to people at the university so that then it's a little easier for people to associate the name and the face and, oh, we already kind of have experience with this person, then that can maybe help give you a little bit of an extra boost on your application, where people will say, yeah, I remember talking to you, you're interested in this sort of research that I'm doing, that I would like to have you in my lab, and they can maybe put a little pressure on the admissions offices to kind of help look at your application a little better. And then the last thing I'd say for applications is you want to make sure you're taking the initiative. In the US, self-advocacy is a very big thing. If you want something, you need to make sure you go out and get it. You're speaking up for yourself, and because all the other students are going to be as well. So you really want to make sure you're not just kind of sitting back and let everything come to you, because in the US, oftentimes someone else will take it first. And then just a little word about essays. People are often asked how, especially the personal statements and part, well, how are you supposed to focus that? Well, the main thing is everyone has a story, whatever it is. Each of you have your own unique story, something interesting, important that you're telling, and that's what you really want to bring out. And even if you haven't necessarily had the best CV, the flashiest list of things that you've done, a big focus is what you've gained or what you've learned. I know in a lot of my programs, I'm often impressed by some of my peers have all these elaborate resumes and they have all this cool stuff that they've done with internships and stuff. But and I haven't necessarily done a lot as much of that, but because I'm able to talk about what I gained from my experiences I have had and how I've been able to apply this, then that's what the colleges want to see. And then another thing to keep in mind is achievements versus fit. Colleges are not necessarily looking to get the top students in everything. They're looking at crafting a class that can give a broad, diverse experience to everyone at the university, whether it's your fellow students, students in who came in year before or behind you, or just even the community. So try to find out what is it that makes you unique, what's your story, how can you contribute to crafting this class. And really helps if you can answer the questions about how can the college help you, and then well, how is that relevant for you being able to give back to the college. For instance, you talk about, okay, I've gone this far, I've been able to achieve this so much, but now there's this little bit where to get to where I want to be that I need a little bit of help on. You guys are good with this. I'm really interested in learning about this. I'm motivated. I just need a little bit more polishing, and you guys have this opportunity, this program, this research that you're doing that then can provide me with this last little step to help keep where I'm going. And then obviously you don't want to get too openly, too overtly transactional, but in the back of your mind, remember that colleges want to know who's going to be able to then give them all those sweet, sweet alumni donations in like 40, 50 years. So if you can certainly, so if we just keep that in mind when you're writing your essays. So I guess that's all that I have now. And if anyone has any questions, then just let us know. If you feel confident in trying asking them in English, then I can respond to that. If not, Victor might be able to help with translations of